Welcome to the Tourism AI Network podcast. I am super excited today to have Josh Huston with me. Josh is a AI solutions architect, and I will just describe him as he's my guy when it comes to coming up with cool ideas and solutions for helping people solve their business problems when it comes to through artificial intelligence. So that's my quick and dirty intro, Josh. But why don't you give a little more color to who you are and what your background is?
Absolutely. Well, what a treat. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. Hopefully, we can connect virtually. Yeah, Josh Huston. I come from a background in business operations. So, started in human resources, got really passionate about people and processes inside of both public and private sector organizations, and then introduced myself to tech over the past few years as as a side part of my career. Now what I do is I help people like Peter and like nonprofit organizations figure out how to map out what they're doing in the organization and find areas for AI adoption, AI integration, solutions of that nature. So we have a lot of fun normally talking to people, designing ideas, trying to pull in the best and brightest whatever tech is happening currently with the landscape, and then design real solutions that move the business forward.
Sweet. Awesome. So part of the reason I wanted to bring you on, Josh, is something that I actually just announced to the Tourism AI Network actually this week through our newsletter, but sort of announcing it here on the podcast, which is Tourism AI Labs. So just for context, obviously there's Tourism AI Network, which is really an organization that I created to help really build a community of tourism practitioners and tourism professionals who sort of want to start exploring AI, do some training, sort of talking about kind of where AI can fit into their organizations and in their personal lives. Tourism AI Labs is going to be a bit of a sort of a sidearm of that, where it's really about, like you said, solutions and sort of ways that we can solve business problems. Really where this idea came up from for me was, I've been talking to destination marketing organizations, and one thing that's come up very consistently is, we hate writing all of these reports we have to write all the time to governments, the various different funding providers that we have. Is there a way we can automate that process? And so really that conversation led to a conversation between you and I and showing you some of what those reports look like. And, the answer was yes, we can actually automate this process. And I don't think it's, anything that's sort of too groundbreaking or earth shattering to be able to do. And so our first project for Tourism AI Labs is actually going to be focused on British Columbia, and it'll be a DMO reporting tool that I'm super excited to dive into. So I just wanted to kind of give that context as to sort of where you fit into my ecosystem. So you, just for context as well, you're within my WSI ecosystem as well. So for those who don't know or don't remember, WSI is a global digital marketing franchise network, and really great group of people with all kinds of really smart people sort of either working in there or kind of part of the network, and we all kind of feed and collaborate together and sort of help drive solutions really for our end users. So I wanted to maybe start this conversation, Josh, with sort of with that background, talking a little bit about what we talked about before we started hitting record, which is, when I talk to people about AI, most of what I get is, yeah, I use ChatGPT, it's a great tool, or I've started playing with Google, Gemini, and it's a cool tool. And I think those are great places to be starting when it comes to artificial intelligence, obviously. And my number one recommendation to everybody always is start using the tools so that you can actually sort of start to understand and see for yourselves how they can sort of help you and make your life and your job better. But beyond just sort of using the basic tools that are sort of what I call the retail tools available for everybody, how does a guy like you come in to help organizations think about sort of how to use AI for the betterment of their companies?
Mm. Yeah, so I think where we start to come in is when we're talking to people about what they do, right? What do you do for work? And most people believe that the work that they do, especially if you're in, the business operations side, marketing, sales, finance, they think everybody, and this, I'm guilty of this myself, everything I do is unique and I don't have, nothing's repetitive. It needs
Right.
me to do like I have to move this forward.
Yeah.
And then we start asking questions like, well, how often do you do this? Well, I do it every month. Oh, do you do it the same way every month? Well, I kind of have a way I've figured out how to do it. And that this conversation starts to unfold and we realize, oh, so you have this reporting requirement for your job and you do it every month and it takes you 10 hours to prepare the report, and or 2 hours or however long it takes. And so then they're typically telling me about some sort of process they use with a chat GPT, with a chatbot that's off the shelf. Hey, I figured out this really cool prompt chain, or I have this way of asking these tools to give me the answer that I'm looking for that sounds nice and is accurate to the data I have. And you're like, great. If you can take the same conversation to a chatbot every month as you do the project, you certainly can automate it because we can string together all those prompts and kind of pre-design this conversation to happen without you in the loop. So there's different ways we think about it. Human in the loop would be me and GPT having this conversation.
Yeah.
That's one way of human in the loop, and that's like in real time. We sit down, we have a chat, takes time. But if you're doing the same repetitive thing and a bunch of people on your team are doing the same thing, there's a real case to be made for what if we put our heads together, really mapped this process down, got to a step by step, and then engineered a solution that followed that step by step process while using these really intelligent tools to sound exactly like we want them to sound and to accurately utilize the data. And those are kind of inside of that, there's a lot to unpack because a
Yeah.
lot of these tools struggle with accuracy in data if you don't tell it how to behave. So there's a case for, well, even as people, like good operators in your job, like you still make mistakes. Anytime you're copying and pasting information, there's a human risk factor that increases. And if there's 20 steps in your process, you multiply the risk. There's a lot of risk.
Hmm.
Same happens with AI. We have to look at every conversational response as some level of risk. And it's only going to be as good as from what we've seen and observed over the past, 18 months of having accessibility to these chatbots. Everybody's different in terms of how much value they can squeeze out of a chatbot. So there's a case for automation when you start to do things repetitively, when
Yeah.
there's moving of data, copying and pasting, a lot of hands-on copy paste, copy paste.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's how we start to explore. And we'll go one by one. You could completely map out a whole organization by the tasks and projects that people do.
Yeah.
Uh, and most organizations have zero sort of map of all the work that gets done anyway. So
Yeah.
we typically take a process approach, then dive into tasks, work with individuals, and then collectively look at, okay, now we've just transformed a company because everybody's work is documented.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. And that's fantastic. And I'm encouraged for myself because here at CIPR Communications, we're extremely SOP driven.
Mhm.
And so that certainly makes the job easier. So step one, I think it's an interesting kind of point is, I have people coming to me, and I'm sure you as well, being like, hey, how can we make AI make my business better? And it's like, well, first of all, do you document your processes? First of all, where is your data and how's it housed? Like there's a lot of questions and a lot of sort of pre-I things that you need to sort of get in place before you
Mhm.
can actually start to talk about the AI piece. Is that sort of a fair kind of a summary of what you just said?
Absolutely, yeah. Because where you store data, if you store data, so many organizations are still pen and paper. And I think there's a time and place for pen and paper. So
Yeah.
many organizations are still, let's sit down and have a face to face and not record that conversation or phone call.
Right.
And you have all this business activity that people are being paid to do with zero trace digitally that
Right.
it happened,
Right.
And so, yeah, I used to, in one of my first jobs, I worked for a government organization, and it was very normal we had no cloud. Everything was in servers, and on my machine was where most of my files and work was performed. And there was no way for anybody to know what I had worked on unless I
Right.
reported it to someone else through an email or I put it
Right.
on blast or something. This was pre Microsoft Office Teams stuff.
Hmm.
So just, yeah, helping people move towards what are these foundational pieces, working in the cloud,
Yeah.
recording information, organizing data is like that if you ask AI, and I would encourage you if you're watching to do this, go chat with ChatGPT or Gemini or an Anthropic Claude model and ask it, what does it need to be successful? Ask it, what does it want more than anything to be more effective? And it'll tell you data,
Interesting.
information, context.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. So thinking about sort of this, just like let's sort of, I think maybe make it real for people. So this the DMO reporting kind of tool that we've been talking about. So data sources I see are, for example, DMOs. Some of them or most of them have a CRM of some kind. They have Google Analytics. Then they have some obviously accounting software. And then there's some stuff that's probably, I would say, a little bit more nebulous in terms of like how many meetings that they have with stakeholders, or how many, whatever. That's probably doesn't live anywhere, or I'm not sure if it lives anywhere. And so those are sort of what I would call like the inputs. And then obviously the output is Destination British Columbia has sort of a report that they want in terms of they have, kind of laid out sections in terms of how they want their report sort of framed. So how do we kind of take outputs and inputs and sort of, how do we kind of what goes in the middle of that? And help me. And specifically, I'm a little bit talking about there's AI, but then there's also smart automation. And so maybe
Yeah.
if you could kind of talk about it in those terms a little bit.
Yeah, so automation is in its heyday right now because it's been around for a long, long time. RPA, robotic processing automation, is the old jargon, I would say. Now people just say AI automation, or just sometimes we even glaze over and lazily just say AI. It's trigger this to do that. I get an email in this inbox which triggers an action in my CRM. That automation style has been here forever, right? When we look at connecting the dots, so there's so many ways we use automation to move data around. On the marketing side of things, you guys are very familiar with this. CRM activities get updated and logged in the system based off of phone calls, SMS, campaign objectives, call to action clicks. Like, all these different things could serve as a trigger. So when we're looking at reporting, what we're really looking to integrate the automation side of things for is knowing where all of our data sources already are connected and wiring them into some sort of knowledge base that we can connect and share with the AI prompts that we do build, or the assistants that we really build behind the scenes here. So that, if you have an assistant whose job is to report how's the website performing, we've gotten government money to have a great website, we've paid a great vendor to manage it, and we want to know what is it doing for the organization and its goals. If we have all the data to support these ideas, what needs to happen is the report needs to be written. We need to say, oh, the website's gotten this many, the metrics, here's the KPIs. And you can't just we could have a dashboard, right? I'm sure you guys have dashboards, you build dashboards. Yeah. Everybody's familiar with that. But can you talk to the dashboard? Yeah, if you put a chatbot on top of that interface. But in behind the scenes mode, if we already know what questions we need to answer, and we have all the data that answers the questions, all we need to do is sequence a logical way of answering those questions and then organizing those answers into some sort of narrative. In this case, there's an output file that is like a template already. They've told us exactly what they want to receive. So we just kind of play a reverse engineer, wire up all the things, and use automation to move the data where it needs to go. And then when we start to use AI, we're looking at the data, we're looking at the desired output, and kind of doing this equation where everything gets calculated together.
Yeah, interesting. So when it comes to the kind of, you said a couple interesting things in there that I'm going to sort of pick apart a little bit. So first of all, automation. One of the kind of things I hear a lot about now is sort of low code, no code automation. And so I'm curious as to whether is that what you're talking about here, or is there something else? And then two, where does the AI fit in terms of in this equation? Sort of, is that sort of where is the AI able to basically take some of the inputs, make some better sense of it, organize it differently? Help me understand those two components of what you're talking about.
Yeah. So when people say low code, no code, what they're referring to are different platforms or tools that we use that have already figured out how to connect. They've already connected all the dots in these apps. So HubSpot, for example, has an open API. They have all these different things that developers can use to control accounts and information inside of HubSpot from the outside. So we can connect all those things. But to code all those connections and controls takes a ton of development investment. What no code platforms have done is wrapped a nice UI around it and say, well, we already know there's 50 different things that you can do for HubSpot from the API. These platforms have went ahead and built all those integrations, but made them very easy for no code people to come in and utilize them. So instead of code syntax and looking at all these lines and numbers and getting lost in that sauce, we're really just focused on connect this to that. So it's more of a drag and drop method, and that is much more efficient, given those tools can actually do the thing that you want to control. So when we have the ability to quickly connect the dots and use these apps from the outside, looking at AI is where we start to either transform data as it's moving. So if you're going to move something, say, from email to HubSpot, if I need to transform the data in some way, shape, or form, I could use an AI prompt inside of that. If you think of the sequence, there's nodes. Gmail, a ChatGPT module, and then HubSpot over here. So I'm that way. And, we could control what the data is, how it's structured using the AI component. That's like the baseline of what we're doing with AI in the system. You can get a lot more advanced with artificial intelligence tools by adding functionality to every single module. So we could have an assistant that's completely trained on HubSpot and could actually take action and decide what to do in HubSpot based off of the thing. So when we start to add AI to the mix, what used to just be move this from A to B and add like a 0.5 step to transform a little bit of data could now be, and we have to have basically a bunch of those automations designed to do different tasks. Where things are going with artificial intelligence is that agents can actually make decisions on behalf of contexts that they know and platforms that they're familiar with. So it could actually, there could just be a HubSpot agent that's in the middle sitting here deciding what happens in HubSpot. So that all the Gmail things in this example could just be pushed to this. And instead of having 50 different action items in different sequences that you've had to engineer, even in a no-code environment, now you just have one and one really smart bot in the middle that kind of is your switchboard. So
Amazing.
it's getting kind of wild in this regard.
Kind
And
of wild, yeah. I
it's
mean, I
very
think for
cool.
most people, these are details they don't need to get too fussed about. The point is you have a sort of a repetitive, data-driven process and a very clear output in terms of what you need. And it's just about sort of using some tools to sort of connect the dots and sort of make sense of it all, right? It's this sort of at the most fundamental level. I have a question that's probably going to come up a lot is there things that can be done to enhance or make better, privacy, protection of data, all of those types of things in this kind of environment that we're talking about?
Yeah. So on the development side, with pretty much in automation, if we're using any sort of AI component, the data that gets passed through and put into the system is never actually being utilized as training data. So there's a layer of security that's baked in for developers where we know our data is going to be safe. For end users, if you're sitting here and you're wondering, well, can I put X, Y, or Z into ChatGPT? If it's got someone's private information, if it's billing information, medical, these are the things that typically will caution you on and say, not to be uploading these things to the internet, assuming
Right.
you should treat this like the internet. Would you post this list of employee data on your Facebook page? And the reason we say that is not because, the OpenAI platform, Claude platform, Google's platform aren't secure and safe, but because as a human, you're practicing bad cybersecurity if you do those things.
Right.
So I'm not as concerned about these platforms because they do have the ability in the settings. Like you can always look in your settings to see how your data is handled. You can uncheck in ChatGPT, use my data for training data or not, which would mean they look at your chats and see how you're interacting with the bot and then use that to help train the model to become better. You can turn that off in your settings, but more importantly, as a human, it's good to practice safe cybersecurity behaviors.
Yeah. So what you're basically saying in a nutshell is that when you design these systems from a developer perspective, the kind of work we're talking about, there are additional safeguards in place to protect data. So it's sort of not anything people need to be too concerned about. And certainly, obviously, if people are concerned, we can deep dive with every client and every person on sort of those specific questions for sure to make sure that they feel good. I'm going to ask a question related to something that's sort of a little bit beyond what we're talking about now, but I know something that is of quite significant interest to many people I've talked to in the tourism space, which is, okay, so that's sort of like a bit of a looking backwards on activities of, let's say, the destination marketing organization on what they've done in the past year to report to their, their funding providers. That's sort of one piece. Beyond that, is there ways to use these technologies to do things like, for example, connect to all of the reviews of online reviews related to the destination, or maybe some of their destination partners, maybe Google search data, like sort of a little bit more? Can we sort of now take this further and say, is there ways to do some forecasting based on information that's more widely available on the web as opposed to sort of private information? Can you help me unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Google's a good source for a lot of data like that. Like if you're talking about Google reviews,
Yeah.
Google has an open API that we can tap into to go scroll through reviews. So we can build those into our solutions, whether it's inside of a chatbot interface, or we can just have it be like report based kind of system where we're pulling information in. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to do that. And there's a lot of third-party tools and tool builders like startups from, Silicon Valley and other startup environments that are really starting to hone in on making these like research-based, automation-based, AI-powered, AI first solutions for these exact things. So there's some great platforms that are coming to market that are $30 a month, $50 a month, $100
Yeah,
a
not
month
too expensive. Yeah.
that allow you to dig around without actually having to build your own version of a tool like that, which is often where we start this conversation. It's a great question because it kind of tees up the should we build something or buy something.
Right.
And not everybody needs to have 10 to 20 AI apps that they're subscribed to, but knowing where to start and purchase your tool, like are you going to spend tens of thousands of dollars building your own app, or are you going to pay $30 for the off the shelf one that already does that thing?
Yeah.
It's posing an interesting, like, especially as a builder now, I have this interesting dilemma of like, I want 100 AI tools because most of them have one or two things that are awesome. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that would make this way better.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
then you start to assess like, okay, what do I need then to get the job done? Should I actually just invest a little bit of time into building something?
Yeah, and I think, yeah, you're right, because many of these tools sort of like you said do one or two things great, but they don't do everything you want them to do necessarily, and that's where the build piece comes in, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And that's the same kind of conversation happens around like no code solutions and low code solutions.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you can do with like minimal coding and programming, just connecting dots, configuring
Yeah.
things, that sort of drag and drop design, that sort of stuff. It's
Yeah.
when you start to get into the custom because all of those low code and no code solutions have their limits.
Yeah.
Once you get into building whatever you do want, if there's things that are outside of those limits, now we're
Yeah.
talking, yes, anything can be built at this point. If you can dream it, it can happen.
Yeah.
But now you're investing a lot into development. And that's something I think it's hard to wrap your mind around when you're just getting into these things because it's like, well, wouldn't it logically make sense that if it can do this, it can do that? And you're like, we're like, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case, just
But no,
depending on the
yeah.
limitations that are in place.
Yeah, and I mean the reality of the situation is a lot of this stuff is very new and it's just sort of all coming to market and it's all just sort of being
Mm.
developed and with different use cases in mind when it was initially built. So now people are dreaming up to your point new use cases that it wasn't designed for and all these kinds of things. And what I'll say too is, in my experience and just talking to you and pricing some things out is like I feel like things AI has made a lot of these kinds of solutions and opportunities to build things a lot less expensive than they were in the past. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we're gonna see that more and more and more. Like if you look at the way we build things now, what we're doing current state with all these automation platforms and no code and low code is we're building apps that we need based off of apps that have already been built
Hmm.
because it's more efficient, it's more like cost effective to use the coding and programming that other teams and other companies have done in
Right.
combination. But as artificial intelligence continues to roll out, and there's a lot of investment going into software engineering type of assistants that are going to help us build faster
Yeah.
at scale. What I think is going to happen in the coming decades is that we're actually going to go the other direction and move back to, well, why don't we just build everything we want for this business and program it all because the cost of programming might drive down
Right.
significantly. So I think that's going to be a trend. Obviously, it's going to take some time to get there because
Yeah.
like we've just started to see glimpses of what AI like engineers, like fully autonomous AI engineers can do with a tool.
Yeah.
Been a launch recently, Devin,
Yeah.
the programmer can solve problems, can think and plan, can do all these behaviors that developers have to go through. And it looks really impressive, but it's like that's version one.
Yeah.
So eventually we'll probably get to a point where we can just say, hey, I'm a tourism organization. We do this, 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 and that. Can I have an app that does all this with
Right.
us? We need
Yeah.
these 25 things. And
Yeah.
you start to combine all of now you get to like eliminate all the apps that you have and get down to like, we have one app that we own, we built.
Right.
All the
Yeah.
data is
Yeah.
ours, that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think that's kind of where, really what we're talking about here is so we have at WSI a process which is called the AIBA process, which is really, I've kind of like a little bit renamed it for my own personal benefit, but I'm going to explain it a little bit for folks here. So really starts off with what I've called the initial AIBA. So it's an initial conversation with kind of your senior leadership team about sort of, really a very high level conversation about AI. What do you know about it? What are your feelings about it? Where do you think it might help? What do you think your employees think about it? That type of conversation. That sort of then just generates basically a list of here's some potential things we can sort of dive deeper into. Then we go into a bit of a training kind of session where we do kind of 2 to 3 training sessions with your organization. And they're really very specifically designed training sessions. I would say first, this training session is not. So the first training session is what I call get everybody on the same page as to what the hell AI is. And just sort of, I always talk about as a communicator, sort of, getting everybody on sort of an equal footing when it comes to sort of information and knowledge about what you're talking about. And then we start to get into a little bit deeper conversations that are a little bit more, okay, you work in accounting, come to me with some ideas on where you think AI might be able to help you in accounting. You work in marketing, because the people at the end of the day who work on the ground floor and to your point have their processes and systems know best where probably these tools might be able to help and where there's opportunities. Then we go into what's called departmental deep dives, which is we really start to dive deep per department. And then what comes out of that as an outcome is really what's called the AIBA, but what I call is the AI roadmap. And so that's really a roadmap of, okay, here's what basically your team said are opportunities. Here's some projects we could start to sink our teeth into. And then always with every organization, there's like what I call the come to Jesus moment where it's like, okay, well, what's your budget and your timeline? And how can we marry the two things, your roadmap, your budget, and your timeline, and maybe come up with one good project. And the reason I'm sort of just kind of explaining this process is because I think that, what you're just describing as these solutions and tools and apps that can be built and everything else, it's like, you need to go through a bit of an education, a thoughtful education process to get to a point of, hey, let's build an app that does this, right? And so, that's kind of what I kind of almost like to slow people down and sort of say, you need to go through this process a little bit because when people think AI, it's like, oh well, they just think it can do anything, and it's not, and it can do many things, but we're not quite there yet in many ways, and whatever. So just maybe I think you were part of designing that whole process a little bit, so I'd be curious to kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole point and the goal from what we built with the WSI AIBA framework is to create that structured process for stepping into this world. Like if you're a business leader, it doesn't take too much time from us presenting what is AI technology, what can it do for you, what are people doing in their organizations already, for you to be able to start firing off great ideas for, oh, well, we have this marketing process that's outdated, or we're doing a big tech overhaul anyways, and this might be a great time to assess, some of our IT infrastructure and our data laking. Stuff like this starts to come very naturally when people are exposed to what's possible. And so the framework is designed to facilitate those conversations, not because we know everything in the world about artificial intelligence, but
Right.
because you know everything about what you do and
Right.
you know all the things about your organization.
Yeah.
And so we combine what we've been researching. I'm part of the research and development lab at WSI. So we've been researching tools, solutions, doing all these prototype projects. We've built all sorts of stuff. We've launched products. We've put our time in to understanding how everything is shuffling and shaking in the world, and it's really impacting business. We want to make that simple because there's so much noise.
Yes.
There's so much noise. I think we're at probably 20,000 plus AI products on the market in the last 2 years,
Yeah.
and like 100 of them are like worth their metal,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then there's the bajillion solutions that people have
Yes.
built for their custom little like idea that are like really good. So we
Yeah.
want to help facilitate this process in an organized way so that it's not stressful, so that you can
Yeah.
be up and running as a group and get both your team moving forward on their individual AI journeys, but then your organization moving forward in the right direction with all the prerequisites. Like if you don't have the data in the right place, if you don't
Yeah.
have data at all, like we're going to
Right.
flesh these things out and find opportunities to start either getting more organized with you guys,
Yeah.
or just like you said, sinking our teeth, identifying some great use cases inside of your business to say, well, if we can do this, you save 20 hours a week times 4 people
Right.
times infinity. And what would those people do if they didn't have to spend their time on that thing?
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the whole framework has been designed to capture what people know about the organization and what's going on in the world with AI.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you said couple things. Number one is, it's such a noisy space. Like I'm all in on this space. Obviously you're in deeper than I am, but it's really hard to kind of keep up with everything. There's so much going on. It's so busy. It's crazy. So certainly having people like you and I that are just sort of all in all the time on this can save a lot of companies and, money, time, and, making bad investments into tools that maybe are not the best tools to invest in. For one, the thing I really like about what you just said the most is, and this is really relevant in my mind for tourism, is that like if you can save people a bunch of time, what is it that they can be doing now with this new time? And I raise that from a tourism perspective because I know in tourism there's massive labor shortages, massive trouble with like, having enough people to do the work and whatever. And so I mean, this is, to me, it's not, a lot of people are worried about loss of jobs, which is, I think, a legitimate concern we all got to be thinking about. But in a sector like tourism, where there's such shortages of labor, it's like actually this is a problem, like a solution to a big problem that we have is in this industry, right? So
Yeah.
if we can sort of find some solutions to help alleviate that stress, I think that's like a huge win for many organizations. So that's fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. I think if you're sitting there thinking like you have some of this doom and gloom, sometimes we'll say Stuart Little syndrome on this, like the sky is falling, what's going to happen in 5 years or this
Yeah.
year. Just think about the things that you hate doing at work. Like
Yes.
you can just zen out on like what is the bullshit you do that you have to do because it has to get done. That's often like that's my question I'll try to throw out to people in the AIBA conversations is what do you hate?
Yeah.
Because it always gets someone to react, but
Yeah.
also they'll be like, oh, I have to send this report every month. Oh, I hate doing it because I have to connect all these. I have to go researching 20 different apps. I have 100 tabs open. You're like,
Yeah.
I'm like, great.
Yeah.
And they're like
Yeah. Use
stressing.
case, right?
But think about it. You can think about it like that way. It's use that. I don't know. Like I'm generally an optimist, but I'll say like spite is a good driver for this. Like,
Agreed.
what do you want to not do because you hate doing it? Is like that
Yeah.
spite of like, what if ChatGPT can do it with me? And
Completely
then if
agreed.
ChatGPT can do it with you, then we can help you automate it.
Then we can go even a step further and do even more with it. Yeah, exactly. Further automated. No, I love it. Awesome. So I'm going to cut us off there because I think we can talk literally all day and for the rest of the day. But I definitely will have you on again, Josh. I really appreciate your insights here and have a great afternoon.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Tourism AI podcast. To learn more about the network or get involved, visit our website at tourismainetwork.com or find us on socials at Tourism AI Network. We'll see you there.